Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through some of the major topics facing importers and manufacturers in China today. Hello again, listener. Adrian from Sofeast here. You are listening to episode 19 of the podcast. Today, I'll be discussing a recent article that Renault wrote on China Law Blog, where he went into some of the challenges facing importers from China that are stemming from a lack of transparency from their suppliers. So what does he mean by a lack of transparency? How does this manifest itself? And what advice does he have for you to mitigate these issues before they become serious? That's what we're discussing today.
Hi Renaud, how's it going?
Hey Adrian, good. Waiting for the weekend. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. You've recently published a blog post actually on China Law Blog. We'll give the link to that in the show notes. And in this one, you're talking about verifying and monitoring your Chinese suppliers. And you start off by talking about China risk. Now, a lot of people probably will immediately be thinking about things like the US-China trade war, maybe Chinese companies being embedded in 5G networks, the situation in Hong Kong, all of this kind of stuff. But interestingly, your feeling about China and risk is actually something a little bit different. So could you explain that, please?
Well, there's risk at many levels. That's the problem. So when I read the newspapers, it's all about what is Trump going to do next, and what about if he loses, what will the Democrats do, and what about Australia, what about Canada, UK, what is the EU going to do, and are they going to go at war with some of their neighbors, and what about what happens in Xinjiang? We talked about that in the last episode, social compliance.
Right.
That's West China is basically a new source of worries. When you had Bangladesh and the buildings that crumbled, and then there was a wave of structural construction audits on the buildings, to make sure they won't crumble. So, as buyers try to cover themselves, and then now it's going to be all about where's the cotton coming from. So you have all kinds of risks at all levels, and in my daily work, it's all about advising importers basically on what they want to do with their supply chain. And the risks that we talk about are, quality risk and intellectual property theft risk, and these kinds of things, right? So what I did in that article that Dan Harris was kind enough to publish on the China Law blog is about these I don't know how to say lower level risks. These business risks, basically at the level of the transactions with Chinese suppliers. And when I say Chinese suppliers, obviously it's not just related to Chinese suppliers. Some suppliers in other countries are just as bad, sometimes worse. I mean, right? So I paid it. I was careful in the article. I wrote, it's there are some very good suppliers in China that don't play these kinds of games, but these are the ones that you need to look out for as the buyer, because some of the suppliers do play these games, and it can be devastating for a foreign company, right? So I don't know. Do you want to go through them one by one?
Yes, yeah. So there's kind of a recurring theme of lack of transparency here, and a lot of the
Right.
challenges that you're going to talk about kind of stem from a lack of transparency, but in different sort of arenas. And yeah, there are 7 that you're discussing, and the first one is in supplier screening and qualification.
Yeah. So if, okay, this is applicable to certain kinds of products. If you buy, I don't know, um, furniture made out of wood, and you want to make sure that the wood comes from an FCC certified um, forest, I don't know, whatever they call it, it's kind of not really a farm, but the source is FCC certified, so it's more sustainable. You need to be able to trace it, right? If you buy some food, there's also some needs of tracing, but it's often much less important. But the crazy thing is, for most consumer goods, the importer doesn't know who the tier 2 suppliers are. So they buy from the tier 1 supplier, the direct supplier, and they don't know from whom that tier 1 supplier buys what is used to make the finished products. And in very rare cases do they actually know the tier 2 and up to tier 3 suppliers. Okay, some of them do, because they did make efforts to know about that and structure all their relationships this way, with this kind of requirement from the get-go, but most of them don't. So what happens is, and I always compare that to trading companies. So it's funny to me, because most buyers, if I ask them, hey, so okay, and do you work with trading companies? And they're like, no, of course not. I go direct to the factory, right? Like, what trading companies? That's so 20 years ago. Come on. But okay, then you work with your direct supplier. Okay, so do you know where they source this and this and that components? The critical components here. Let's say you buy, I don't know, TV screens. Obviously the display is extremely important. It's not the only one, but it might be the most critical component, that if it comes with defects, the whole product will be defective, and it is a big part of the cost of the full product. So I asked them, okay, so do you know where the display is made? And they're like, no, just buy the screens, but I buy from the manufacturer. Yeah, okay, well, the manufacturer just put things together and pack them, but they are acting sort of as a trading company, and they are actually transforming the product. That's right, and doing the testing and so on. But in the end, they're still hiding your supply chain away from you, right? So if you don't take these the right steps from the start, it's going to be difficult to know where these key components are made, right? Now the problem is, you buy your screens, you work with the company, especially to customize the screens, to do something really special for you. You spend some time with them to get things right, and then 6 months from now, you start to have quality issues, let's say, or delays or whatever from the display supplier, and you're like, okay, well, let's go have a look at what's going on, and your supplier is like, well, no, this is kind of a business secret, just trust me, I'm gonna handle that. And hey, guess what? It they don't really fix it, and it keeps going. It might even get worse. What do you do? Well, in some cases, you have to start over from scratch with another supplier that will try to customize the product, to your wishes the same way and everything. You lose so much time, right? And that's okay. Now, is it fair or not? And that's a very legitimate question. If the supplier did all of that work for free to develop the products and customize it to your needs, then you can't really grasp the fruits of their work, right? if they charge you for some service to do that, then of course you need to have all the information. Um, the problem is that in China, even if you are ready to pay for some service and to get all of this information in your hands, they don't want to do it because it's just a reality of the situation. More than 95% of suppliers in China, but also in Vietnam and some of the places, they want to hold you in their hands and have some leverage, more leverage over you than you have over them. It should be hard for you to leave the relationship, basically. That's what they want. That's where they feel comfortable. And with that kind of mentality, which again, I'm not saying it's fair or unfair. It is a product of also how a lot of buyers train them to behave because they get burned by some of the buyers, right? But that's the dominant approach, and people who do not do that here are often considered sort of dumb, their friends look down on them and say, this is never going to work. Your business is never going to work. You're at the mercy of the buyer. It's too easy for them to leave you for saving a few percentage points. So again, I'm not saying it's fair or unfair, smart or dumb, but that's just the reality of it, and it doesn't really make the buyer's life easier. The buyer is sort of hitting a wall often on this. So that's what I listed and I described as challenge number one. Even if there's one or two critical components or critical materials, you might be unable to actually know who makes it and qualify them and go and fix the problem when needed and so on. Number two was the ability to follow up when a new product is developed, and especially for customized parts. So when you develop a new product, and let's say an electromechanical product, if it's a new product, chances are some of the parts will be totally new, right? They have to be customized, custom made. And what happens very often, and I can't really put a likelihood or a frequency on that because I'm not sure, but it does come up regularly because people have been complaining about that to me for more than 10 years. So, you start working with a supplier, they say, yes, it's gonna, okay, this is gonna be $12.50. And you say, okay. And they start production, and then midway through production, after you have wired maybe, you paid for the tooling and you paid maybe 30% down, and they purchase the materials, they start to work on it. Halfway through production, they come back to you and they say, well, it's really taking much longer than we thought. So there's a delay of 2 or 3 weeks. And there's a lot of scrap with that part and that part. And it's really driving the cost up a lot. So, we need to revise it. Sorry, but now it's $22. You're like, what? This is amazing. This is just crazy. How come such a jump in price? How come you didn't see that coming? And they're like, yeah, but there's a lot of scrap rate because it's a lot of time, and we have to rework and we have to inspect more and blah blah blah. And you can't really push too hard because that supplier that does the plating or whatever is really picky, and the orders are really small for them. And if you keep pushing hard, they will just reject. And I'm not sure I can find another one for such high quality standard and low volume that will accept your order. So how come that happened? Well, if you are an experienced buyer that has developed a number of new products in that field, well, guess what? You should have forced them to do a pilot run, and you should have maybe sent someone on site during the pilot run to observe what they do and to count, okay, so you do it on 100 pieces, and we're going to count how many of them are good the first time, how many of them you have to rework, and so on. And then, okay, well, scrap is 10%. Okay, sign on this. Okay, I observed it, I counted it. Thank you very much. Then when you go to mass production and they say, oh, scrap is 35%, and you say, sorry, I can't really accept that because we were there and you were using the same equipment and the same people and the same methods and so on, and you get to 10%. And then if you were there to observe, you go back and you look if they're doing it the same way, and how come it was so much better before, right? Much more likely that you find a solution. So this is related to point one, obviously. You need to be able to go there and talk to these guys, right? So because in most cases, you're not allowed to go there. And also, by the way, in most cases, they do not want to do a pilot run of 100 pieces just for you. You can't really catch up on that in many cases, right? So if you know exactly what you're doing, you've seen the movie 10 times before, you're going to have to insist, and you're going to talk about this very soon when you're talking to a new potential supplier. You're going to have to talk to other suppliers if this one is not very receptive to this idea, right? But for every importer that really knows what he's doing, there's at least another importer who's sort of cutting his teeth through the process, and that's where they're faced with the $12.5 to $22 increase, and what do I do now? There's no way I can make money on this, and just drop the project. I mean that happens all the time. So
yeah, but not what a nightmare. And if you can't go and check on the willingness or the capability of this potential supplier to do important things like a pilot run, then what's your option?
Basically, keep sourcing, keep looking somewhere else, or maybe your project is not ready for China. The wrong volume, the wrong whatever, the wrong requirements and so on. But if it's ready for China, you're gonna find someone out there who's willing to do that most of the time, right? It's just gonna be harder, but very often there are solutions. But it's it goes back to a business discussion of what do we do and who can accept that. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the third one, you're still talking about new product development and, well, the lack of transparency in it, but more on the design side this time.
Right. So, as I mentioned in the first two, the typical supplier here doesn't really want to open the kimono and give you too much information. Information is power, and they want power in their hands. Well, again, if you develop a new kind of product, it's there's a lot of design work maybe that's involved, right? So if there are electronic parts, you're going to have to do the electronic design, to do the layout, the schematics, and to pick the components and things like that. If it's maybe there's an enclosure, a casing that's in a very specific shape, well, they're going to have to do the CAD drawings, and based on that to also do the drawing to make the tooling to make it. And all of this results in design deliverables that the Gerber files, the SolidWorks drawings, and so on. So if you pay for that design work, you definitely should have the latest files all the time, the latest versions of the files all the time. The problem is that a lot of suppliers, OEM suppliers, they will say, yeah, okay, yeah, we have some designers, yeah, we can do it. And they kind of don't really dare to charge the customer. And at the same time, they know that, maybe I don't charge them just a little bit of it just to make sure I hook them and just to confirm they are serious, but I will do most of the work. But then I will keep these design files to myself so that the customer cannot then go to another supplier with these files and then say, what's your best price for that? Oh, okay, you're cheaper than these other guys, so I give you the business. Again, that sort of makes sense from the supplier's perspective. However, if you pay for it, you should definitely have all of your intellectual property. And in so many cases, there are companies that go to China, talk to suppliers, or maybe these days just communicate with them, do a Zoom call and so on. And
not go to China.
yeah, and then they say, well, can you make this? Yeah, sure, okay, Oh, we haven't really made any progress on that side of the design. Can you work on it and make the prototype? And the Chinese side says, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, okay, let's do it. And no proper agreement is signed, at least when it comes to who does what kind of development work and who owns the IP and who is allowed to produce and all these kind of things, and who pays for the development work. And then in the end, they get the prototype, they approve it, and and then at one point somewhere in the relationship, they understand that, oh, actually, I don't have the intellectual property in my pocket. I don't know. So, and then I ask them, and then they make it very clear that they are not going to share these files with me. Whoa, what does that mean? It's not my product all of a sudden, right? And then I cannot go to an investor and say I have this great product and I'm starting to sell it, because the investor is going to say, well, it's not your product now. You give it away, right? And the problem here is that again, the typical, I'm talking about typical Chinese supplier here. I'm not, some of them are great. Some of them would be very straightforward. But a lot of them will just, say nothing and then make, go as fast as possible into mass production and just keep chugging along, and they will not tell the buyer about this situation, about the consequences of all that was decided and how things were paid and managed. And
Sure.
inexperienced business people go into that and are very surprised and are very upset. And that's something that we always need to tell people when they come here to China.
Well, in fact, I mean, you've written on supplier choice on a number of occasions, and also, manufacturing contracts that are applicable in this situation, which are going to protect you as a buyer and make sure that you end up with the IP and not the Chinese supplier. And also, we did do a podcast episode on this as well. So, talking about the different types of suppliers and what to look out for. So I will drop the link in there, and I think that'll be a good addition to that point. But yeah, absolutely, buyers have got to look out for the supplier's intention. I mean, you mentioned they're not necessarily going to talk about, the ramifications of using them to do product development and design, and of course not, because they're not going to disadvantage themselves, are they?
Right. If why would you give away the key, basically the key to the barrel, and let the buyer go out and have another supplier get to production, because these OEM suppliers just want to go to production as fast as possible. Development for them is sort of part of the sales process, if I may say. And
Sure.
they're not interested in that. They're not interested in making money out of it. They just want to get the production, and they sort of subsidize it, at least in part, just to lock the customer. And some customers, are very happy about that, and they hey, you're our partner, and you invest in it in your own way, and you're going to do the production, and you don't want to go anywhere else. And sometimes it works pretty well.
If
So
the buyer's a good proportion of their orders, then I guess the relationship would be
oh yeah,
very mutually acceptable for both parties.
that certainly helps. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
So for number four, we're still talking about information, but in a little bit of a different way, and it's confidentiality of information this time. So do you want to go into that?
Right. So, as most people may have noticed, in China, suppliers are not very serious about maintaining, safeguarding their customers' precious confidential information.
Mm.
Send them something, and they will send an NDA. Okay, send it, because they've never been sued over an NDA. I mean, it's pretty hard to actually prove that someone, how to say, did not comply with an NDA. It's not so easy. So they know it's not very risky for them, and then they will send it to one of their supplier. They will send it to some people here and there, maybe to get some opinions about something, and they they might spread it to 5 or 10 different parties without telling the customer, and the customer might get nuts about that, right? Plus, I would say there's no culture here of, um, how to say, of thinking of the risks, and of leakages. For example, there still are a lot of very unprofessional suppliers. They hire a salesperson, and the salesperson says, yeah, that's fine. I'll just communicate with the customers, and then they use their personal email address, to get all the information. I mean, just that is already nuts when you think about it.
Mm.
And um, and so many of them get their corporate email systems hacked. I mean, with all we changed the bank account. Here's the invoice. Send the payment to this bank in Russia. Blah blah blah. A lot of importers were hurt by that, and then the suppliers say, yeah, but you should have called us or something, but the importers say, wait, you get hacked. I mean, it's your system that got hacked, not mine. You're kind of responsible here, right? So there's not much of a culture of really safeguarding all this information as very important. um, I'm not going to try to understand the why and the how, but that's just the way it is.
Mm.
And so they share this, and then there's also an opacity of the business environment where you're not really sure if that other company is their 100% owned subsidiary, or is it a sister company, or what is it exactly is it? Sometimes it can be a bit murky. So it's not so easy
Mm.
to follow up on all these things. That's what I would say, and that is definitely driving some buyers crazy.
Mm.
Um,
You
so
mentioned the word murky. I mean, murky by design, probably.
um, well, on um, when you look at the Chinese government, I feel that they're trying to make things more transparent, at least to a certain extent, and only
Mm.
when it comes to business information, definitely not personal information.
Mm.
But they are trying to make things a bit more open and more transparent, actually. That's my feeling. And this is going to change quite a bit with the social, what is it called? Credit system, social credit system for
Yes.
companies. It's already in place for individuals, sort of. It's being phased in different areas, but it's also being phased in also for companies. And some of this, a lot of this information might be made public, which is actually a good thing for buyers. Let's see how it goes. Let's see how it
Hmm.
goes.
Okay. And number 5, that's the challenge in purchasing materials and components.
Oh, wow, yes. A lot of stories about that.
Hmm.
So imagine you're making you're making some electronic products, and so in my example it was batteries. So you're making only a 5% or 10% profit margin on that, and maybe a 5% profit. And and you're thinking, well, there's got to be a way to make more money. And that's the way a lot of these factory bosses tend to think. What can I do to 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 make more cash, right?
Hmm.
And one very, very, very tempting approach is to substitute one of the most expensive components with another one that's much cheaper, that sometimes looks exactly the same, sometimes is a straight copy, right? It's a counterfeit. I give the example in the article about a Samsung battery, but it
Hmm.
could be many other things. So I mean, it's quite easy actually in China to get a counterfeit Samsung battery, especially if you buy in large volumes.
I can't believe it.
Um, right. So yeah, so if you are unsophisticated, you switch to buying 100% of the batteries from the counterfeit source rather than the real source. But that's kind of easy for the buyer, to pick up. All of these devices, these widgets from that specific batch have the same problem with the battery. Okay, let's test it. Oh, I have a serious doubt. Then go back to the Samsung distributor and ask them if there was a purchase order for that, and then bang, the supplier is cut, right?
Hmm.
Now, what do the more sophisticated buyers, manufacturers do? And this is not just the Chinese. I mean, this is everybody doing that. The Taiwanese have been doing that for a long, long time. So, you play a little bit, 10% of the batteries, boom. And that might already double your profit, right?
Hmm.
And nobody notices, and the next time you go 25%, right? But you sort of think, okay, there's got to be a limit. I have to be careful, right? But you're making a lot more money here, and it's so hard for the buyer to pick up on that, to detect it. It's very, very hard. And so that's a risk that is always there. And you know what? It's not just at the level of the manufacturer. The manufacturer might decide to do this and to do that, but they might also be fooled by their own suppliers. Exactly the same thing. It's
Hmm.
it's it's even more tempting to them because it's a um, higher portion of what they sell. It's relatively it's a bigger potential gain, so they can be fooled by their own suppliers. And you know what, I mentioned authorized distributor of Samsung, let's say, or Panasonic or Sony or whatever.
Hmm.
Well, these distributors can, they might play games. I mean, I don't have 100% confidence in them. Plus, especially these little games at the margin, right? Just 10%, 20%, where it's not so easy for someone nail them. And maybe their management doesn't want to play these games, or maybe an employee plays those games. I mean, there was a case a few years ago with the supermarket chain Carrefour, and they were buying some cases of wine. I think it was Carrefour, I'm not sure. So it's a case of six bottles, and some people in the warehouses were opening them, taking two out, putting two really bad ones, but in exactly the same packaging, same glass, same everything. Close the bottle and close the case, and and boom, get it in the stores. Well, it's really, really hard for someone after that to come back and really nail who did it. And at one point in the supply chain, something wrong happened in these cases, right? And this is part of the risk that buyers have to deal with, really. Same thing with so many things. You have plastic. Well, the thermoplastic, great, but you might say I want zero recycled, and okay, whatever they regrind, they use somewhere else, and then over time they do 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, until something happens. Until when you do a certain test, the part actually breaks, right? So it's always a very high temptation, and that was my point number 5, actually.
I suppose it's kind of easier to make your main supplier more accountable for what's going on with auditing and quality inspections, but when it's then filtering down into secondary or tertiary suppliers, what would you say is a good way for buyers to try to reduce the chances of this happening beyond their main supplier?
Well, do your own sourcing and direct, nominate these more serious suppliers. That's really all I can say, and do some testing, right?
No, good advice. Okay, and then we move on to number 6, and this one is manufacturing.
Yes, and more specifically subcontracting. So, I mean, so many people have complained about that and written about it. Basically, the idea is, if you can actually go there, then they say, yeah, okay, come to our factory, and you come, and it's a nice factory, and they know what they're doing. They're making very similar products. They have a quality system and so on. Then you say, okay, fine. I'll give you an order, and you make it here, fine. And then you're going in your country, and then when the components are ready and they're ready to go into manufacturing, well, maybe they're too busy. Or often, I mean, the key trigger usually is that they're a little bit too busy. They chewed off more than they can bite. Or the opposite, I'm not sure. So, and and then they subcontract it. They give the order to another factory. And let me tell you, it's virtually never a better factory. It's pretty much always a worse factory with fewer systems in place and older equipment and everything you can expect. Much less management, because then it's much cheaper, right? And then what do you think happens out of that? Well, that's where a lot of disasters are coming from. That's not good. That's really not good. So but basically, what can you do against these kind of things? You try to have first a contract that makes sure subcontracting is not allowed, and yada yada. That probably helps, and having a presence during production also helps, because they know that you will know that it's not allowed. Right?
So if all your products turn up on a truck just before it's time to load the container from somewhere else, then something's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, exactly. If you send your inspectors and then they arrive and people say, yeah, have a cup of tea, the goods have not arrived yet. And you're like, what do you mean not arrived? So that happens quite a bit. Yes.
And finally, number 7, and remember, we're talking about lack of transparency. So this is where it turns out that your factory is actually selling your product.
Well, this happens less often than some of the others I have mentioned. But that's also a risk that people need to keep in mind, right? So let's say, and this is especially attractive or let's say tempting to the manufacturers when some special tooling was made, right? So they made some tooling for you for your product, and they make a product for you, they ship it to you, and then there's some time when the tooling is just sitting idle, not being used. In the meantime, they usually show your product also in their showroom, on their Alibaba page, wherever, right? And some other people might say, hey, great, this is just what I need. And then some of the suppliers will say, no, this is just to show you, basically what we can do, but we have a contract with this customer, we cannot, we cannot do anything with that. Great. But then some other some other suppliers will say, oh yeah, sure. The quantity is 3,000 pieces and right? And give us the order and we make it, right? So you get cheated in 2 ways in that case. Number one, obviously, they're using your design to make products that might compete with your own products in the marketplace, maybe at a lower quality standard. I mean, it can have a lot of bad consequences. And the other problem is that they're using your tooling, and your tooling will have a much shorter life because of that. So this happens. Now there are ways to reduce these security risks, in your supply chain. The big brands all have programs about that. It's not just about contract, but it's, for example, some of our clients actually do that. They ask us to pull the tooling out of the suppliers, and we keep it. And then when they need it for production, we bring it back. So the temptation is lower because then they would have to fabricate the tools again, which is possible, but less likely, let's say. So there are little things like this that can help.
Does registering, your design and your trademark and that kind of IP in China, is that also a strategy that you could use to help prevent suppliers from making and marketing products? Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely, especially the trademark. It's not that difficult and not that expensive to register it. And if you start to make products in China and sell it in your country, if you don't own the trademark in China, somebody else can register it, and then they squat on it, and they can even register it with the Chinese customs, and have them stop your shipments. Basically, make it impossible for you to make your own product, which is amazing.
That's crazy, isn't it?
So yes, lawyers can help you with that. The design is a different story. Might be possible to register, certain kind of patent. Again, there are IP lawyers specialized in this. I don't really want to comment on that.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, contract, protecting IP, all of this very important, because you don't want your factory to be selling a product behind your back. I mean, what a nightmare, as you've spoken about. So all of these things you mentioned at the start of the podcast, I mean, they're sort of low-level risks, but and I suppose in comparison to, things like the US-China trade war, which is a huge issue at the moment for a lot of buyers in the States, of course. These may sound less significant, but actually, if it affects your business, these are still pretty massive risks, aren't they? So I think all 7 of these these challenges are really, really useful for the listeners. So yeah, thanks for going through those.
All right, thanks. Yes, and as you said, yes, this can definitely kill your business, sometimes pretty much outright. So you got to watch out for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to like and share, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other places that you get your podcasts from. See you next time.